everybody, and welcome to our weekly spoiler review episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds here from the
Geek
Buddies.
Hey.
What if I should have showed up to animated? If I had the ability to do that, I would have done that. But unfortunately,
kind of feel like I show up animated every week, to be honest with you.
That's actually a fair point for sure. Well, today, if you haven't seen the title of this video, we're going to review both episode 6 and 7, Lost in Translation, and Those Old Scientists here on this episode. They are both spoiler reviews, so if you haven't watched either one of the episodes, then go and watch them and come back and hang out with us. But basically, we wanted to catch up because Comic-Con's been crazy, scheduling, all this kind of stuff. So they dropped the surprise 7th episode at Comic-Con. We're just recovering after our Comic-Con discussion last night. If you guys haven't watched that discussion, it is up on the channel for you all to watch, and will be up on the podcast feed as well, or is up on the podcast feed by the time you watch this. But Michael, let's break this thing down. We'll start with Lost in Translation, episode 6 here of season 2 of Strange New Worlds. Interesting stuff going on here with Uhura. This is very much a Uhura-focused episode. We talked about how every member of the crew had been getting their own episode, in essence, and this one finally focused on Uhura and her journey, her emotional journey, her unwillingness to confront the deaths that have experienced in her life, that she's experienced in her life, and then she gets used by these organisms to transmit messages here to stop them from killing these organisms, unknowingly killing these organisms by the way that they're using the deuterium. So your thoughts on this overall episode here, Lost in Translation?
I mean, it's hard because it's a great episode, but then I watched Those Old Scientists and it completely blew me away. So I'm going to try and focus on what's good about this one. But this episode had a lot going on. I mean, they've already shown us, and we know we have a musical episode coming down the road, that this season is all about, let's just make each episode 100% its own thing with its own vibe. So we're going to do the legal drama. We're going to do the time travel. They're just going down the line and doing it. And this one was definitely sort of like a little bit of horror vibes, but that classic sci-fi, classic Star Trek. Look, we're trying to do something technologically and we're hurting aliens, and they're communicating with us in a way that we don't understand, and it turns into weird horror shit. It's the same as like Kirk and Spock and everybody seeing characters from Alice in Wonderland back in the original series. You know, like you get those episodes where you're like, we're going to do something that's really out there, but then wrap it around to be, here's the sci-fi thing. So that part, pretty straightforward. Really interesting that we got more about Uhura's backstory. I really love how they tied the fact that she was having a really hard time with the fact that Hemmer died in season 1, and that tying back into how she hasn't ever really faced the death of her parents, and that the solution to this whole thing was walking through it. You took a really great sci-fi trope and you wrapped it around a very emotional story. But then in addition to that, they bring Kirk in, they pick up the threads of the La'an Kirk episode in a really subtle but really sweet and kind of heartbreaking way. Also, we get the very first time that Kirk meets Uhura in this timeline, and then we end it with Kirk and Uhura and Spock sitting around a table for the very first time. So that is just like a geek, beautiful moment. Like watching the three of them, seeing that first handshake, like they're just doing a really deft job, I think, of they walk this line between, we're doing our own thing, we've got our own vibe, we're making this crew of the Enterprise its own thing, but we also know where we're going and we're putting all the pieces there. So I thought this was just a lovely, lovely episode.
Yeah, I liked this episode. It got a little too hippy dippy for me, I have to say. This idea of, these organisms that are in this deuterium that they're trying to use, that it's supposedly for fuel, and this is a refinery. They can't seem to get it to work. And we've got this Federation officer Ramon, who is sabotaging everything because he's being influenced by these organisms because they're trying to stay alive. And so this idea of like, well, if you use this thing, you're destroying their world. And it's like, okay, I guess Pike is very malleable about this stuff. Pike is always like, well, just find a new place to build a refinery. Like, money grows on trees? Like, it's just interesting how they deal with certain...
There's no money in the
Federation. Oh, yeah, well,
they don't use money. The Federation doesn't use money, John. So
yeah,
in point of fact,
whatever they use,
they don't even need it to grow on trees. It doesn't matter.
It's still time and effort of people putting together a whole new thing and what have you. So it's just an interest. It was a little bit hippy dippy, but I did enjoy the horror stuff you were mentioning, Mike, the zombie stuff that we thought was going on here with Emmer. Where are we going with that? But then we got this, which is what we always have in every one of these episodes for Strange New Worlds. We really have this, like, for lack of a better term, this humanist approach to things, this idea of confronting death. And it's ironic that Kurt is in an episode about confronting death, because that's what happens to him in the original series in those movies, right? This idea that the way we confront death is as important as how we confront life. So having that part of that element be here in this, I thought was really interesting. And Kirk being the one that's kind of guiding her through this, Kirk being the one that's, telling her you got to deal with death. Being a Federation officer, this is part of it, or you might as well go and do another job. So you've got to come to terms with it. And that little push, that little instigation for her to really, confront these things and look at these things and look. Dealing with death is not easy. Dealing with death with a family member is terrible. Remembering those feelings, it's tough. You want to hide sometimes, but you've got to confront it, because the only way out is through. And we see Uhura do that. And that ending shot with Hemmer smiling at her on the bridge, in the form, of course, being influenced by those organisms there, bringing that image to her mind, man, it got me emotional. So no matter the hippy dippy save all the organisms type of stuff, which I love about Star Trek, don't get me wrong, I do enjoy it. Does it get a little too much sometimes? Yes, but I still enjoy it. But I got a really nice emotional touch at the end with the smile he gave.
I do find it funny that you classify saving a sentient species from death as hippy dippy.
I mean,
this wasn't like
animals to live all the time. We kill chickens, cows. I mean, we seem to have no problem doing it and eating our burgers. Yum, yum. No problem.
I will tell you right now that if a cow psychically reached out to me and had me seeing visions because it was like, please stop hurting me, I'm gonna fucking not eat the cow.
Well, there's documentaries that'll show you the cows are trying to say don't kill us.
No, you're right. But I do think, look, I mean, I've said this before, like, had I not grown up my entire life eating meat, I probably wouldn't eat meat, because the more documentaries and the more things you read about animals and their levels of intelligence, particularly like pigs and some other animals, you're like, yeah, it's probably not the best idea. So maybe I'm too hippy dippy, but yes, I see no issue with the let us not kill the aliens that are asking us to please not kill them.
Of course, in a utopian world, you don't want to do that. And of course, that's been, as I said, that's a hallmark of Star Trek. So I did like that. What did you think of? I mean, it may go too far in certain directions for me, and we're going to get to that lower deck stuff in the next episode. It may, but in the end, I still enjoy all of it. I still enjoyed this episode very much. I put this one though in the first episode, like it belongs in that box, as opposed to the other standalone awesome episodes we've had this season. But that isn't a negative. It's just that it's in that kind of box in the way it approached its story.
Yeah. I don't think, I don't disagree with, like, when you look at some of the other episodes that have come out this season, I think, not because this one is bad, it's just the other ones are so good. I think it does go further down on the list. But I think basically what it is, they took a really nice Uhura story about loss and grief. And by the way, I think they've done a really nice job of fleshing Uhura out. I think in season 1, you kind of got, okay, well, you're Uhura and you're new, but we didn't get a lot. But now learning about the past with her family, seeing that she's kind of this workaholic that can't relax, that really wants to prove herself, and is all like they've just added some nice flavors to her character that really sort of like round her out as her own unique, this version of Uhura being her own unique individual, which I think this episode did a nice job of. But then, this episode, this was one of those connective episodes. This is an episode where you had this A story that was a solid, what's going on with Uhura, she's seeing shit, what does it mean episode. But then along the way, you got some really nice Kirk and Sam stuff. And like their issues and their competitive issues because of their dad. And you got some really nice Pelia and number 1 stuff on the station.
That was great.
Where Pelia's like, what's your problem with me? And Una's like, you gave me a C. And she was like, you're fucked up about your friend's death. Like that was all really nice stuff too. So and then, like I said earlier, like the La'an Kirk stuff, like I think with the moment that we saw the end of that episode, which still might be my favorite episode of the season, the moment that Kirk shows up on the Enterprise, you're like, here we go. And that whole scene between him and La'an, where she was so awkward, and then as they're walking away, he's like, hey, don't forget, you still owe me that drink. Like, I was just like, every little gay romance nerd part of my body, like, I clutched my pearls and fell on the couch. Like, I was just like, oh, like, it was so good.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. It went because we also had the Chapel and Spock and this idea of, do we tell the Federation about our relationship, and this fear that if we look at it for too long, it'll disappear. If we make it make people aware of it, it'll disappear. And certainly that's Chapel's greatest fear as in terms of their relationship, right? And so they have that. And I love the fact that they're playing 3D chess. I love the fact that Kirk looks over and knows that Spock was 2 moves away from being checkmated, because if you know the original series, that is like one of the first things you see Spock doing in the original pilot is playing 3D chess. So Kirk and Spock have played that ad nauseum in the original series and in the books and whatever. So it was great. Nice little reference there. I love that Uhura was like accusing Kirk of hitting on her, which I thought was hilarious because, of course, everyone knows the reputation of James Kirk in the Star Trek franchise, rather. And then seeing, I just like that we got more. And then the Una and Pelia stuff, Mike, that hit me out of left field because Pelia has not been the easiest person, whereas Hemmer, who was contentious last season, but you could sense that it was like he's just his way. Do you know what I'm saying? Pelia is much more fluid, and you can almost see the baubles hanging off of her. You could almost smell the patchouli. You could almost like this is
literally the episode where you hate hippies.
Yeah,
this is the John Rocha hates hippies episode. You literally are like hippie dippy saving the aliens, and Pelia smells like patchouli. That's your review. That's your review of this episode.
Put it up on there. Put me on a Federation poster, just pointing to that. But no, I liked that. I liked that Una said to her, you know, you're a space hippie. And then Pelia just rolled with the punches, because a woman of that age who has had to go through all the things that she's gone through in the Federation, and she says, I've been called more names than the stars, but space hippie is a new one. And she rolls with it, and she doesn't take it personal. And then in the shuttle, she tells Una, it's because you look at me and see your friend. And I have had that experience. I know what you're going through. And if you need to say it's about the sea, and you don't need me to contradict you, and you need to have that, I will give that to you. So it's really very, very sweet how much the characters in this show, Mike, care about each other, create space for each other, and it's a good thing, man.
And I think this is where we were talking about this down at Comic-Con, but we were talking about a lot of shows that we love, like The Office, like Parks and Rec, had very rough first seasons. And it wasn't until their second seasons that they really got their footing. Now, I don't think Strange New Worlds had a rough first season. I think Strange New Worlds' first season was delightful. But I think Strange New Worlds' first season focused a ton on Pike. Yes. And all the other characters got some play, but Pike and Spock got the lion's share. And it was more about, look at all these cool situations. And you can really feel this season that they were like, guys, let's dive deep on Chapel, deep on La'an, deep on M'Benga, deep on Ortegas, deep on Uhura. And we're really getting into the nitty gritty of who these characters are, while at the same time, every episode kind of being its own genre of the week episode. So I like I said, I totally agree with you that I don't think that in the big scheme, when we rank all the 10 episodes of season 2, I still think this one's going to be closer to the bottom end, but only because everything else has been so strong. I really enjoyed this. I love the whole sci-fi trope of aliens that are so different from us. Yeah. Like the entire concept and Uhura being sort of communications being Uhura's thing. Yeah. The fact that this was a completely new type of emotional communication. Yeah. Where her, like the whole concept of the brain being sort of overloaded and not knowing how to process and having to like, just, okay, what's really happening? What are they saying? Let me push through. And the fact that it was Uhura who figured that out. Yeah. It just fits really well for me into, this is what a show or movie that shows a younger version of a character should do. Yeah. Like show me the beginnings of this character becoming who they become. Yeah. And the fact that Uhura is very smart, the fact that Uhura speaks so many languages, all great. Yeah. But actually watching real time this thing happening where I don't know what's going on, realizing it's communication, and then doing her own version of translating. Oh,
Yeah.
I saw this zombie. They're in pain. I attacked myself because we are attacking them. Like watching her sort of put it together, I thought was really just good, solid writing.
Yeah, it's a mixture of things, right, Mike? Like you said, the horror element is here, but there's also a mystery to solve, right? So you've got the mystery aspect of this all, and then you've got the one language that she can't speak is the language of grief. The irony of that. So she's got to figure out how to speak that language. I forget the line. I can't remember if it's a movie or TV show. It's like you speak all these languages, but you can't speak the one that connects to people, and so having her have to learn how to speak the language of grief and understand it and master it like she's mastering the language that's being spoken to her through these images that she's getting is such a nice, interesting dual journey that she's going on in this episode, and does a wonderful job performing those moments as well when she's figuring this all out and putting it all together. And then finding her power and her strength in that and confronting that and then showing the pictures as well to Kirk later on. Yeah. Good. Yeah.
I think the scene with her and Kirk, just both Celia Rose Gooding and Paul Wesley do such an amazing job in that scene. And the fact that it's this whole scene where it's everything that you just said, but like she's facing the fact that she doesn't deal well with death, that she can't really face grief. And it's like, I don't know if I can be a Starfleet officer if I can't do that. And then Kirk is like, you can't.
Right.
You might not be able, and gives this great speech about it's us versus death. We can die at any time. And right now for you, death is winning. It took away your parents. It took away your friends. And you need, you can't let death win. You need to go through this. Yeah. And to then have that final moment of her communicating with the aliens, ending up on the ship and literally facing the death of her family. Like both, she's emotionally and physically, literally looking at it. Yeah. And then getting to the end where she's then showing Kirk the pictures of her family and talking about them really fondly. It's just, it's that great thing where you're like, you're basically doing an episode on this is how you deal with grief.
Yeah, basically.
But you're doing it with, to your point, hippy dippy aliens and cameos and the first time that Kirk and Spock and Uhura meet. So there's all this other stuff going on that if you're just enjoying the sci-fi-ness of this show, there's a ton to enjoy. Right. But at the heart of it, it's like, hey, dealing with grief is hard and sometimes it's scary, but we have to do it. And so here's how you should do it. And that's
also, we should talk the Kirk and Sam situation. We haven't mentioned that yet in this section of the review for this episode. And this thing at Kirk shows up and see Sam. You could see they're two differently constructed human beings, even though they're brothers, two completely different points of views. But you see that there is this father figure that looms heavy over both of them. James wanting to do what he needs to do in order to, kind of be looked at by his father with a little more reverence because he had a tough time getting along with his father, which we find out Pike had those issues as well in the next episode. And Sam himself, being a little jealous, little sibling rivalry. And even when he comes back later, and Sam comes into use here with helping Uhura make this connection and figure out what's going on. But later, when Sam goes to apologize to Kirk or to James rather, and say, I get it, and I'm proud of you, first officer, doing it younger than anybody else, including our father. I'm proud of you. And then he waits for James to give him that apology back. And James doesn't. And that makes so much sense in what you know about James Kirk and this back and forth with him and Sam. So there's still the sibling rivalry, even though you can tell that they do care about each other. So it was an interesting thing to give Sam a little bit more here to do in this episode as well, which I thought was a nice surprise in this one. Dan Jeanette doing a nice job here with Sam.
And to your point, I mean, this is just very good, tight storytelling in an episode that has all these other things going on. First scene is show up, find out Kirk got promoted even faster than their dad, and Sam is pissed about it.
Yeah, Sam's jealous
because Sam is like jealous, and also like you're making me look bad, and
Kirk's Dad loves you more.
That's a you thing. Yeah. But then clearly Sam is feeling that sort of like, even though he's doing what he loves and he loves being a xenobiologist, feeling like there's not as much worth there. Like it's not as showy as Kirk. Kirk is like the son that's doing all the stuff. So the fact that Uhura has to go to Sam to help them figure this out, kind of says, hey, what Sam does is important.
Right.
And
Validates.
then and it's valid, and you need xenobiologists.
Yeah.
Kirk wasn't going to be able to solve this on his own. They needed Sam. And then Sam kind of comes back and has that great sort of like, all right, I thought about it. I calmed down. You guys came to me. We did this whole thing. I'm going to write a paper on these aliens. I'm feeling really good about shit. Hey, I'm sorry. And then Kirk is like, cool. Cool, thanks.
Yeah. In some ways, Kirk's emotionally progressive, and in some ways, emotionally stunted. So, very interesting combo. It makes sense because of Kirk.
But it is interesting because, like, you know, usually I'd be on the side of, you know, that was very nice. I'm sorry too.
Yeah.
In Kirk's case here, and look, Kirk is a little emotionally stunted. We've all seen the movies. We know where he goes.
Sure.
But I don't know that he really has anything to apologize for.
I agree with you because this was all Sam's issue. Kirk's like he even says to him, "Why is my ambition make you upset? What is that all about?" Yeah.
So I'm always very quick to say this is where Kirk was wrong, but in this case, I think he didn't really do anything wrong.
It happens, you know. If you desire for more and other people don't desire for more, sometimes those people who don't desire for more get upset at your desire for more. So it's a weird thing to navigate when you're confronted with that in life, for sure. But the other part of this Kirk stuff we should talk about, as you mentioned, he meets Spock for the first time. He meets Pike in person for the first time,
right?
Which is really interesting, and meets Uhura. So Kirk has become a much more present character in this season, Mike. So what do you anticipate is going on here and just laying the groundwork for this kind of stuff in this in the way that they're doing it here in the show?
You know, I don't know, because it's not just so. Look, if you really think about it, Kirk, who you kind of thought, oh, they're going to keep Kirk in reserve. We're not going to overuse Kirk because you don't want Kirk to overshadow Pike. You don't want Kirk to take over things. But Kirk now has met Uhura, helped her solve something, has met Spock for the first time, and has met Pike in person, and has a weird sort of relationship with La'an.
Yes.
Which, based on the trailer that's online right now for the musical episode, seems like that's a thread that they are going to continue using.
We're getting in bed. Yeah.
So Kirk has relationships with a lot of people on the Enterprise that's not his Enterprise yet.
Yeah.
And look, I think that everything they're doing with him right now, I'm enjoying. It does run the risk of overshadowing some things, so it's gonna but at the same time, so far this season I feel like we're in really good hands with them. So it's one of those things where you can see those warning signs of like maybe too much Kirk is not a good thing. But at the exact same time, I'm so enjoying all of this that I'm kind of like, don't mess it up, keep stay in this lane, and I think we'll be good.
And I wonder if we're moving towards something where, and I know Star Trek right now is so in flux. We've never had more Star Trek, but then, they just they canceled they moved Prodigy off Paramount Plus, and they're trying to figure out where to put a season 2. Discovery is coming to an end. We supposedly had this Academy thing, but that's not probably happening. The films are up in the air, huh?
Is Academy not happening?
I don't know what's going on with Academy because I don't know. Paramount Plus is removing stuff. Maybe yes, maybe no. So it's kind of up in the air a little bit. But go ahead. Would you want to? No,
continue. I will respond once you've made your list.
Great. I just want to say, I don't know where we're going with this. Is there a possibility? Because Pike even brings it up next episode, which we'll get to. The idea of the Pike. We know what's going to happen to Pike. We know what it leads to, the menagerie and all of that. We know where we're going. Is there a possibility that Strange New Worlds continues into the original series and it becomes the other episodes of the original series, the other adventures that you didn't see? Will Star Trek fans lose their minds if this Kirk eventually takes over the Enterprise with people standing in for the original crew? We've got most of the original crew already on the ship. So it would be Nurse Chapel, Spock, Uhura. We don't have a Scotty. We don't have a Sulu. Chekhov comes in the second season. So it's going to be interesting to see if this is where they're going with this. And I'll tell you this, the more I spend time with Paul Wesley's Kirk, I might not be I might not be a no on this.
So I think a couple of things. One, I don't think Star Trek is it. Look, I think what happened to Star Trek Prodigy is a crime because
people love that.
Star Trek Prodigy is a very solid, it's very different, but once you get into those characters and you get into the story they're telling, they do some great sci-fi episodes. I highly recommend if you haven't, if you're like, oh, Prodigy's not my thing, I watched the first couple episodes, I didn't really get into it, watch a couple more episodes, and I'm telling you, it's really great Star Trek. But if you really think about where we're at with Star Trek right now, movies aside, because who the hell knows what they're doing over there. Star Trek TV is better than we've ever been. And with the exception of Prodigy, look, Discovery's ending, but it's ending after 5 seasons. That's a decent run for any show. Like, so I don't think that Star Trek, I don't think the Star Trek Discovery ending after 5 seasons is a, well, that didn't work. I mean, you got to give Star Trek Discovery credit for sort of relaunching Star Trek TV, and I think they did a great job. As wobbly as Picard was, boy, did they stick that landing to the point that everyone is just begging for Star Trek Legacy, which I would be shocked if we don't at least get a Star Trek Legacy movie the same way we're getting that Section 31 movie with Michelle Yeoh. I think Star Trek Academy is still happening.
It looks like it's happening. The announcement was in March. I guess I had my wires crossed on that. Alex Kurtzman being one of the co-showrunners for it. So, And
so, is that all of them? Did I get everything? Discovery. Oh, and then Lower Decks is going into its 4th season. And Lower Decks is very, very funny. So, like, you've got Prodigy, wherever it's at, but you had 2 Star Trek animated series, one of which is still moving forward, the other which is sort of in flux. You've got one show ending, another show going strong, and then to your point, I remember when they cast young Kirk, you were very like, I don't know about
how
this
many
guy.
more times can we? I was.
And look, I don't think they should rush it. Like, I really like this crew, and I am super down to see this crew for a few more seasons continue to have their adventures, and I think they deserve it. But the hardest things to do in recasting the Star Trek, they've got Spock and Kirk are the 2 of the hardest. I'd say Bones is up there, but you've already got a Uhura that we all like. You've got a Spock we all like, and you've got a Kirk that we're liking more and more every day. So if you did another 2-3 seasons of this cast of Strange New Worlds, and then you all of a sudden flipped Strange New Worlds to be retelling some of the classic Trek stories with a new spin on things, I don't think people would be that upset about it.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. So we'll see. One thing I want to ask you about this episode, and then we'll hit some Easter eggs and finish up our review of this episode. But some of the things that I've seen online and some people commenting on our reviews. And by the way, thank you to everybody who watches our reviews. I know it's not getting the biggest views, but you guys are ardent viewers every week coming in for our reviews, which we appreciate.
We're glad that you're here. And yes, I'm talking to you. I'm talking to you right now. We're glad that you're here.
Wow. Very personal. Thank you from Michael Vogel. But yes, but some of the complaints people had in the responses to our reviews are you okay with how much the lower ranked officers violate the rules and violate and kind of talk in insubordinate ways to their superiors? Does this bother you? And certainly in this episode, it was the first time that it hit me like, okay, I can see the criticism, because Uhura comes on to the deck and she's like, you need to stop this right now. You're killing people. Stop it. Shoot the torpedoes. Do this, do that. And Pike is like, okay, cool. Do your thing. I get it. I'm going to take the heat for this if it happens. So yeah. And even when he tells her, when she's going looking for Ramon by herself, following the blood trail, she calls in, and Kirk, I think, is the one that says, okay, wait there for me. I'm close. I'm just around the corner. Let me get there. And she doesn't wait. She goes in solo, which we've seen, of course, in Star Trek many, many times. But she goes in solo and almost causes herself to possibly get blown up there if Kirk hadn't transported them out after Ramon had set the explosive. So do you think is this an issue for you to see them take a little too much initiative in certain moments and in a way, step above Captain Pike, for God's sakes, on his own bridge? What are your thoughts on this?
Here's my thoughts.
Yeah. Can you see the criticism, I guess?
I can see the criticism.
Okay.
Here's anyone who knows me as a human being.
Yes.
In my time that I spent as an assistant or a lower level executive, I too did not often obey the chain of command and said whatever I was going to say.
You still don't.
And I still don't. So I understand the criticism. I hear the criticism. But given my own personal experience as a human on this starship I would be those lower ranking officers on a starship. And God hope I have a captain like Pike that's just like, all right, Vogel's gonna Vogel.
He's usually right. Let's see what happens. Let's see what happens. All right, let's hit some Easter eggs on this thing, just to let you all know. The deuterium refinery is basically part of an actual starship, fuel used to create matter-antimatter reaction that powers the basics of the warp drive. For those of you who may not know that, we do hear Pike being called the fleet captain. He's in charge of the Enterprise and the Farragut at this particular juncture here in this refinery, and that is a reference to the menagerie. He does get called that in the menagerie. He is called the fleet captain as his rank there. We hear this reference to the Bussard collectors. That is from Ortegas. Notes that refueling is underway. They are the red shiny things at the front of the warp nacelles, which we see in close-up in the episode as well. A great Hemmer flashback. Great to see Bruce Horak back as Hemmer. I mean, Mike, that was really sweet.
It was super sweet.
Right? Uhura explaining, I was constantly asking Hemmer to do this. He got irritated, so he just showed me one day. And we see the video of that, which I thought was really awesome to see as well. And there's a sabotage reference, of course, to what Ramon is doing. The way it's pronounced, according to Den of Geek here, it may be a bit of a shot at the way Kirk pronounces sabotage in the original series, which I think is hilarious on so many levels. We have astrometrics here, which is referenced in the show in this episode, which is essentially in Voyager. It's essentially a specific kind of space laboratory on a starship. 7 of 9 was a big fan of astrometrics there. Already mentioning the How We Face Death as a Wrath of Khan reference. That's there. The Uhura family shuttle crash. It was mentioned back in season 1, episode 2, and we see the footage here for the first time. Admiral Nagura is referenced by Pike, which is really interesting. And that's a reference to Star Trek The Motion Picture, ladies and gentlemen. Nagura has never been seen on camera, but Kirk mentions that he has to convince Nagura to give him control of the Enterprise again in Star Trek The Motion Picture. And of course, as we mentioned earlier, Kirk and Spock meeting for the first time. This is something really interesting and new to have it be in this way. Kirk and Spock are in an altered timeline, which is how they meet in Quality of Mercy in the finale of season 1. So just interesting to see how they're making this all kind of work and move around each other to maybe put them together down the road. So those are just some of the Easter eggs from this particular episode, which I kind of enjoyed. So wanted to highlight there. Anything to say on those, Mike?
No, I mean, look, I think this was an episode that was, aside from the actual meeting of the three of them in this episode, like all of the Easter eggs are more sort of like the science techie Easter eggs without like being like the really hardcore, really fun and go for it references as we are about to have as we discuss the next episode. So I thought solid Easter eggs, but some of the Easter eggs in this next episode, really took me for a ride.
Yeah, those might be all you. We'll see. But this is going to be fun to talk about this next episode for sure. But that is our spoiler review episode for Lost in Translation for episode 6, Lost in Translation. We're going to take a quick break right now, and then we're going to jump into episode 7, which might be a slightly longer conversation. We'll see. We'll be back right after this. Oh, and real quick, I do want to give love to Dan Liu, who directed that previous episode, and the writers Onitra Johnson and David Reed did a wonderful job with that episode, Lost in Translation. This episode, episode 7, is what we're diving into now. Those old scientists. It is directed by Jonathan Frakes here. It's written by Catherine Lynn, who had written for Strange New Worlds and Lower Deck, and Bill Wolkoff, who is the other writer here, who's been with Strange New Worlds since the first season. Michael, this is an interesting episode for me. There's a reason I don't watch Lower Decks. I tried to watch Lower Decks in that first season. I guess I'm a little bit of too much of a stick in the mud with my Star Trek, that there's just too much humor in Lower Decks for me that doesn't 100% work. So the idea that we were going to get Boimler and Mariner here in live action with the wonderful Jack Quaid, the incredibly talented Tawny Newsome, who I loved in Space Force, seeing them come live action here, I was not 100% excited to see this happen. But as the show went along and we dealt with the Orions, and we dealt with that time portal, and we dealt with Boimler's fandom of everybody on the Enterprise. Then Mariner showing up halfway through, really kind of throwing everything up in the air. I did not expect this episode to work. And although at times it got a little close to me being like, stop it, I still enjoyed this overall because it had a very sweet undercurrent of appreciation for the franchise of Star Trek in a meta way, as well as a real way with the characters that we're seeing in the show. What did you think of this episode here of Star Trek Season 2 of Strange New Worlds?
Well, I think Lower Decks is absolutely hilarious.
I know. There are people
I think Lower Decks is so funny. Yeah. But what I love about Lower Decks is they've done a really nice job of, as much as it is just a let's rattle off as many Star Trek in jokes as we can, Mariner and Boimler are great characters. They are very, very funny. Like Boimler is like this ultimate fanboy living within the universe of his own fandom.
Yes.
And then Mariner sort of being this, I'm going to act like I don't care because of my mom and because of everything else, but I actually know a lot and I'm really into shit too. Yeah. And look, and I think what this reminded me of is years ago when David E. Kelley was running Ally McBeal and The Practice at the same time. On like one was on Fox and one was on ABC, but The Practice was like very hard, very gritty legal drama of the week. And Ally McBeal was Ally McBeal. Ally McBeal was fun, frivolous. Each week is a case in court about love and relationships and whatever. And they did this sort of crossover thing where there was 2 episodes, like the cast of The Practice showed up in Ally McBeal for part 1. And then the cast of Ally McBeal showed up on The Practice for the part 2 of the episode. And you sort of had this thing where when the characters from The Practice were on Ally McBeal, they were a little lighter and goofier. Yeah. And then when the Ally McBeal characters showed up in the world of The Practice, things got a little too real for them. And so it was this really great example of 2 shows that have completely different tones colliding together. And I think what they did here was so perfect in the way that, Boimler and Mariner show up in Strange New Worlds and just still talking the exact way that they talk and acting the exact way they talk in animation, and having these 2 characters that if everyone else on the show, even in a comedic episode of Strange New Worlds, is at like an 8, the 2 of them are at an 11. And watching everyone in the Strange New Worlds cast being like, whoa, this is a lot. Like it was a delightful episode. It was super silly. It was super fun. It was chock full of Star Trek Easter eggs. Yeah. And within all of that, you actually still had like this really nice arc for Boimler. Like it was that moment where you get to meet your heroes and all you want to do is impress them and show them how cool you are. And everything you do fucks it up. And everything you do is like, oh, nope, mess that up. Nope, mess that up. And then to get to the point where you sort of get to help save the day at the end. It was just a lovely little arc. And then within that, just like last episode with Kirk and La'an, in this episode, you picked up some of the Chapel and Spock stuff. Yes. And kind of had Boimler drop a bomb on Chapel that was very, very sad. Dude. But as he was just fucking with the timeline left and right. I also love a Star Trek episode that has a little bit of fun with, like, we've seen enough time travel. We all just, saw The Flash. We all see the heavier version of you go back in time and you make a mistake or you mention something and it fucks up the timeline. Right. And I love an episode that just had fun with it, where every time Boimler opened his mouth, he just couldn't help but drop one thing or another thing that, like, they probably shouldn't know. And it went from varying degrees to being just silly and ridiculous to really sweet, like what happened with number 1 at the end. After watching that second episode with Una, where she is fighting to be a member of Starfleet and just wants to be a member of Starfleet, even though she's had genetic modifications, for her to find out that in 100 years, she is the poster child for Starfleet recruitment. I got a little choked up. I'm not going to lie. It got me. It got me real good. So I loved it. I thought it was absolutely adorable and hilarious. And I had a big dumb smile on my face for the entire episode.
Well, let's deal with the main storyline, right? It's Boimler and Mariner coming through that portal, appearing in live action from their animated. And we start out on Lower Decks, which I think is a really interesting way to, listen, that is pushing the boundaries of believability in a Star Trek episode for me. Starting out in an animated situation, the USS Cerritos arriving at the planet Krulmuth B to check out this Krulmuth B portal, and Boimler's talking about he loves portals. He knows all about these portals. And from what I understand of him on lower decks, he is a guy who is a fountain of Star Trek knowledge, both useful and useless at times, depending on the situation. So him being jazzed about all of this, and then him getting sucked up in this. We hear about the Orion person that they serve with on the ship, Tendi, her great grandmother or grandmother finding or discovering this portal, and Boimler's like, no, it's not true. It was the Federation, blah, blah, blah. And we see that be an arc that comes to fruition by the end of the episode. But they show up here, and you're right. Boimler messes with a lot of stuff here. Pike's impending doom is a thing that's hanging over, which we haven't really kind of talked about a lot in this season. It was a big part of last season. So to have it come back, be something we revisit here, because there's a true reverence that Boimler has for Pike. I mean, he dressed for him for Halloween, as we hear about there. And we see that he is trying not to make these mistakes he thinks Pike doesn't know. And then he finds out Pike and Boimler and Mariner find out that Pike does know. And it leads to a beautiful back and forth. And I kind of liken it to what we just talked about in the previous episode with Kirk and Uhura. Kirk telling her, you've got to confront death. Here's Boimler saying to Pike, look, I get it. You want to go off by yourself because this is the first birthday where you've outlived your father. But there are people who, don't you think that just because just like you would want another day with your father, there are people here who, when you die, will think that they wish they had one extra time with you or one extra moment with you. You could give that to them in this birthday party. And although it's set up in a funny way with Chapel and Ortegas getting the idea from Boimler to throw a surprise party for Pike, what it leads to is a very beautiful interaction here between those two guys.
And and Lower Decks does that. I mean, everyone thinks Lower Decks is all just jokes and funny, and it is all that. But like, they did a really good job of doing that thing exactly that you said. It's the same thing that I think Lord and Miller do really well in their movies, including Across the Spider-Verse, which is be funny. Go for the joke. Like, go for like being as funny and out there as you can be. Have Spock smile like a fucking sociopath.
It's weird.
But then all of a sudden hit me with this really emotionally true moment. I think him saying that to Pike was great. I think Pelia saying to Boimler, like, I've known a lot of people, and like basically fake it till you make it. Act like a hero until you're a hero. Like, just, that's all you got to do. Like, there was just some really lovely moments in the episode that I really, really enjoyed.
Yeah, they both kind of took something from each other, right? Pike was actually impressed at being revered by Boimler, even though he didn't let it go he didn't make it overt that he was impressed by it. He was kind of moved by it and honored by it, but also flattered by it, as any human being would probably be. But
Anson Mount playing the I'm liking these compliments more than I should.
Yeah.
Like Pike finding out, because Boimler can't keep his mouth shut, that he is still revered 100 years later.
Yeah.
And even when Mariner's like, oh yeah, he totally dressed up as you for Halloween. He had to do a bunch of stuff with his hair, and you can see this. And the jaw, like, had to work the jawline. You see this moment where Anson Mount like smirks, like he's so he loves that Boimler dressed up as him for Halloween, but he instantly covers it to try and be like, no, it's fine. I'm professional. Like, it was, and like everyone in the cast, I was watching a behind the scenes thing, and all of them said like it was so fun having the two of them on set, because it gave everyone a permission to just like push it even further, like to stay at their level of comedy, even though you're still in your Strange New World sort of mode. Everyone was just getting to play even a little bit more than they usually do in a really fun way.
Yeah, look, the Strange New Worlds cast, there's a lot of humor in the first two seasons that we've enjoyed so far. The second season, first season, a lot of humor. It ain't Lower Decks humor, but it certainly has humor within it. But this, as you said, them showing up, Jack Quaid, Jenny Newsom, them showing up and giving them permission, I thought was a really great thing to enjoy and see here in the back and forth. Yeah, sometimes, like, especially when Mariner shows up, I mean, I was really surprised that Mariner was the funnier one when she showed up and was so irreverent with all of this. I thought she'd be much more respectful in what's going on with Uhura and everything like that. But clearly, no. And so
Mariner Look, I think Boimler is hilarious, and I think Quaid does an
Yeah.
amazing job. Boimler is like the heart of the nerdy little heart of Lower Decks. I think Mariner is the funniest. From episode 1 of Lower Decks on,
Yeah.
Mariner makes me laugh. Someone who is on, because like Boimler is the guy that's on the Enterprise and is like, holy shit. Or on any starship, he's Boimler gets into the Federation and he's like, gotta obey the rules, gotta impress everybody. Oh, here comes Riker, gotta look good. And Mariner's the one who's like, yo, Riker, what's up, my man? Let's do this thing. And it is just like constantly hilarious. So like even when she first got there, and is like, whoa, did we time travel? We totally time traveled. Are we in the past? Is Uhura here? Tell me Uhura's here. I want to see Uhura. Like that's exactly like that's the vibe. And I thought they both nailed it. They are very the show is very lucky that, and that like I see people talk about this on Twitter, but like the cast of Lower Decks, they all look a lot like their animated characters. That's not always the case. So they were really fortunate in the fact that you had 2 actors who you were like, so if we put them in Starfleet uniforms, like they more or less look like they're animated characters. We can just do this, and it worked out great, I think.
Yeah, there were moments where it was like, I will say there were moments where it pushed, like when she was talking about young hot Spock, or when Boimler is reacting to the sparks and he's screaming like something out of a Three Stooges episode. To me, that got a little much as I was watching it. But like I said, I'm a stick in the mud, and I'm happy to own that. But it didn't take away from the enjoyment of what we were getting here, and the expertise that it took to weave these 2 differently themed shows, as you mentioned earlier with David E. Kelly, to weave these 2 differently themed shows so effectively in this episode. And look, it's the shortest episode of the season. To be able to do it in the way that they did, I thought deserves a lot of praise and love for that. Yeah.
And look, I get what I don't agree with you, but I understand if you're not a Lower Decks fan and you don't watch Lower Decks, then some of the asides that the 2 of them have, or Boimler screaming like a girl and going like this, you're like, well, that seems a lot. But if you're thinking of it in the context of, like, these are 2 animated characters from an animated universe in a live action world, like that is proper. That is how they would act. And even Jack Quaid in an interview was saying, because so something you don't think about when you think about animation is, when Jack Quaid came in and was doing Boimler in the voiceover booth, he did some fun stuff, but like when the animators are animating him and they're storyboarding the performance, like Boimler does a lot of things that Quaid doesn't do. There's a way that Boimler runs. There's a way that Boimler freaks out. There's a way that Boimler moves his arms. So when Quaid knew that he was going to play Boimler in real life, he went back and watched a lot of the animation to see how Boimler moved and was like, oh, okay. Even though I've been doing the voice the whole time, let me make sure that I try and do this and this and this. So, and he actually specifically called out that Sparks moment that you mentioned. And he was like, I wanted to make sure that I did the Boimler scream and kind of reacted the way that animated Boimler would. So I totally get if you're, and I'm sure you're not the only one. I think there's a lot of people that watch live action Star Trek that don't watch all of the animated Star Trek stuff. Right. And it definitely is. They really swung for the fences with this episode. And so I think if you're a fan of both, it's like a home run. If you're not necessarily a Lower Decks one, there's probably moments where you're like, what are, like, they are just talking a mile a minute and they're this, and then holy Q, and like, what are they talking about?
The Q reference, which was hilarious. Yeah, I thought that was funny. But I want to hit some of the things they also do with this episode, which is they further along these overall arcing storylines. Just like we talked about in the last episode, early in our review, Michael, we get more with Nurse Chapel. Boimler, as you said, Boimler running down the hallway after Nurse Chapel, very much as Boimler probably runs in the animated series, and then having that conversation with her. And we see, even with all the goofiness going on here, we have this really honest moment where Boimler is saying, like, wait, have I altered Spock in some way? He's not usually like this. I've read every biography. He's a very stick in the mud kind of guy. Doesn't show his humanity at all or barely at all. And so what is this all about? And then we see this kind of slowly coming over Nurse Chapel's face, the realization that he is talking about Spock and has read all these books. And he hasn't mentioned her once in those. He hasn't mentioned her once that she's in these books, that she might have influenced Spock in a certain way. And she says, I hope I can. I mean, I was foolish to think I could influence him, but and then we see her tear. Like it's not going down her face, but we see her getting emotional.
Yeah.
And Boimler realizes that, and we take that on like, oh man, there's a tragic nature to the Chapel Spock relationship here that is eventually in some way going to end between them. And so having that be reiterated here, even amidst all the goofiness, I thought was really smart mixture of tones as well.
Yeah. I mean, this, and again, this is what I was talking about. It's taking something that's very funny.
And
then all of a sudden blindsiding you when you realize what's happening. So like Spock trying to be more human now that he is having some fun with Nurse Chapel, and like they're having like the entire relationship going on with the two of them. And he's like, oh, well, now that I'm living in the moment and just doing what I want to do and really exploring this side of myself, I'm going to try and be more human. And it doesn't work great. The smile is creepy. The laugh is creepy.
The close-ups
but he's trying. But the fact that Boimler, not incorrectly, is like, I fucked up. I don't know what I did, but I fucked the timeline.
Yeah.
Like Spock is not supposed to do that. And so then like trying, like, I think I did something because Spock is this and he's never this and I know this and da-da-da, which again, Boimler, you're not supposed to say any of this to somebody 150 years in the past, but
right.
But like it's exactly what you said. Like she is putting these pieces together and goes, oh, we're not going to stay together.
Right. Yeah.
This is temporary. This is not permanent. He's not my guy.
Yeah.
And like, you think of any of us, anybody, when you first meet that person, you know, we're all looking for love. We're all looking for those relationships. You meet that person, you're super excited. You're at that point in the relationship where it's hot and heavy and you're like, maybe this is it. Maybe this is the one. And all of a sudden someone from the future is like, oh yeah, no, this guy's going on to do great things. And I don't think that this is it.
Yeah.
And not that that's exactly what he says, but she puts together those pieces correctly. And it's a really heartbreaking thing. You know, we talked at the end of that episode where they finally got together and kissed, like, where is this going to go? How is this relationship going to end up? And the fact that we're just 2 episodes past it and she's already kind of got confirmation that they don't last. They're doing some really interesting stuff with it.
She's more worried that the relationship is going to end than he is, right? So he's living in the moment. She's living in a future fear.
Yeah.
And so it's an interesting combo because she has, you know, it's taken her a bit to admit her feelings, and it took that episode for her to finally admit her feelings and what it led to. Spock is more like rolling with it, right? And even Boimler says, oh, is this a phase? This might be a phase, which really unsettles her a little bit. So you see that be a part of this thing. So is she so caught up in focusing on this thing ending at some point that she's not living in the moment to appreciate that it even exists? Yeah. And so I like that that's an element of this as well. And connected to that, Mike, you brought this up in the last episode as well. When we were doing the review, La'an, we hear her giving the rules to Boimler there when he first shows up. And she adds an extra rule, which is don't form attachments to people because of that. You could affect the loss of family and friends or whatever. And Boimler's like, wait, no, I don't. Is that a new one that they added for back here? And we see that the Kirk stuff is still very much working there. So we see those two relationships working through here.
The way that they're just peppering it throughout the season to just keep them alive, keep those threads alive, while each week is kind of its own, like I said, its own genre, its own thing, is really, really well done. I will also say, as good as Jess Bush does in the chapel scene in the elevator with Boimler,
so good,
which is lovely. Prior to that, her and Ortegas, in the bar with Boimler, fucking with him about time. Like, he is so on edge, and they are like, did you fuck up the timeline? Did you tell us this? Why don't you tell us about this? And just poking him, and the two of them, I don't know that I've ever seen the two of them on this show look like they were having as much fun as they did doing that scene. And it was just adorable. Like, it was just so funny, because I do think, look, we've had some amazing time travel movies, and yes, stuff like Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure definitely have their fun with time and don't take it too seriously. But we've got our Terminators. Like I said, The Flash did this. We have so many like, don't mess with time, and it can really fuck with things and whatever. So just seeing Star Trek have so much fun with, like, you know, even when Boimler first wakes up and he's trying to pretend whatever, and Pike is like, I don't know what you're trying to do right now, but we already know you're from the future. So and he's like, oh God, thank God. I really didn't know what I was going to say there. Like we figured it out.
Yeah, yeah. And also another thing with Boimler is the way he jury rigs the bridge there so they can catch the Orions and pursue them. I think the way they handled that, and we talk about time travel stuff, and I meant to mention this a few minutes ago, but Star Trek 4, obviously a time travel, then going back in time to save the whales. We see the San Francisco reference. Mariner makes a San Francisco reference, which is really funny. So we see that here in the episode. And when he is jury rigging that, it reminds me of that scene where Scotty is teaching them about what he's teaching them about. And they're like, wait, was he supposed
to?
Yeah,
computer.
Right, exactly. What he's supposed to? Are they supposed? Well, how do we know that he didn't discover it? So I just helped him along to discover it. So I like that they did this by having everybody turn around. That has how they got away with that similar situation,
which is such a childish like, and this is like just the silly humor. It's like, hey, don't break the space-time continuum. Well, I know how to do this thing that you haven't learned yet. Well, just turn around.
Yeah, just turn around and not
turn around. Just don't look. Just don't look. Great, cool, awesome. I also just, as we're talking about really great scenes, because I think the Chapel and Spock stuff was great. But I think the Mariner Uhura stuff was just equally as lovely. You know, Tawny Newsome talked about the fact that, you know, particularly getting to play a character on Star Trek when she got cast as Lower Decks, like Uhura, as I think for any black actress, Nichelle Nichols is someone that you grow up thinking like she paved the way for so many things. You know, famously was told to take the Star Trek job from Martin Luther King Jr. So Tawny Newsome in an interview was talking about how like Tawny Newsome, the actress, looked up to Nichelle Nichols, the actress.
Wow.
Beckett Mariner in Lower Decks looks up to Uhura.
Right.
Then Tawny Newsome, the actress, gets to be playing scenes with
Celia Rose Goodwin.
Celia Rose Gooding as Uhura, giving her advice. It was like layers upon layers of like, how cool is this scene? And so to see sort of a black actress who was the lead in a Star Trek show, in the animated Star Trek show, coming back and talking to like a version of the OG black actress and having this whole scene about like who she is, and like, and again, because they've established Uhura as sort of like this workaholic who can't have any fun, to take Mariner, who is really good at having fun, and taking her to the lounge and having the drinks and the whole bit, like all of that was just, I thought it was just really smart, fun writing that was worked within the world of the show, but also worked in this meta sense that was just kind of a love letter to Nichelle Nichols and Uhura and everything.
Yeah, and add another element to that. It's also furthering the character of Uhura as it's constructed in Strange New Worlds, right? Last episode is all about her, like, not taking a break. She's been up for 3 days, and she might have some poisoning here, but really she's getting these messages and what have you. Now we have another episode where people are harping on the fact that she is a workaholic. You have someone from the future coming in going, but you're known for being chill and not taking it too seriously and knowing when to relax. That is not the Uhura that she encounters. So we know that there's a future Uhura, even though she's a hardcore workaholic now. We know there's a future Uhura that is not that way and has a little more work-life balance, shall we say. And Kirk might have been the beginning of that by showing her pushing her to confront her grief so she can start to let go of these things that are holding her back. So very interesting to see how all of that is kind of weaving in to lay the groundwork for a little more Uhura as well, fleshing her out a little bit more.
Yeah, totally. 100%. I also really enjoyed, I mean, just like good writing, setting up at the beginning with Tendi, this whole debate about, well, it was the Enterprise that discovered this thing, and her being like, no, it was Orion scientists on a science vessel. And he's like, I thought all Orions at that time were pirates. That's offensive. And then having this whole thing where Boimler gets to the Enterprise and they're like, oh, it's an Orion ship. They're probably pirates. And he's like, ooh, I'm pretty sure it's a science vessel. And they weren't really a science vessel. And it was the beginning of him fucking things up. But him being like, oh yeah, in my time, we don't really say that. Like, that's not what we do. Like, that was all funny. And then just sort of that twist at the end that the solution to everything was, we're going to let you guys say that you discovered this and be a science vessel. and that they were, oh, that's all we ever wanted to be. This is really great. So like you sort of get like it's maybe the beginnings of the Orions getting to like be more than what people saw them at. Like it was just very well done. And then they get back and they're like, hey, Tendi, it was a science vessel. Like it was just again, it was like a nice little like, here's this piece of this puzzle, just putting it through the episode, and it worked really, really nicely.
Well, let me ask you about the Enterprise references. I know that's not a show that either one of us looks back on with much reverence, even though I think at the time we knew someone who was you knew that person more than I did, who was a main actor on the show.
Yeah.
But the references to the Enterprise here are all over how they solve this situation through Boimler and his knowledge of the NX-01. We hear about grapplers, which Lon loves, and those were the early things before they had tractor beams. Travis Mayweather is referenced by Ortegas. He was apparently the name of the middle school. It was named after him, and that she was a huge fan of him. And we hear about Hoshi Sato, which Uhura is a fan of and wrote 3 papers of. And he was the communications officer, or there was a communications officer on the Enterprise who invented the universal translator. So very interesting stuff to reference Enterprise, the first Enterprise here, which is a show that doesn't get the same kind of love that other shows do. So did you think this was a way of, again, is this an episode like an overall meta love letter to the Star Trek franchise in this way?
I mean, Lower Decks is just a meta love letter to Star Trek. So the fact that this one had a little bit, this episode of Strange New Worlds had a little bit more of that in there was really cute to me. But I also, like, it made sense. Like, the NX-01, the very first Enterprise, is about as far away from the Strange New Worlds cast as the Cerritos is to the Enterprise.
Right.
So the fact that you've got Boimler and Mariner running around the Enterprise like kids in a museum freaking out about everything.
Yeah.
And then you get the Strange New World crew kind of being like, well, yeah, you know, I mean, I always loved this. And oh my God, if I could have seen this. It was just a nice connective moment where they were like, oh my God, are we sounding like them now? Yeah, like we are. And it was because they, not only is it people freaking out about their history and what they really enjoyed, but they started to talk a little bit like the Lower Decks crew. Like, you know, like it was like, it was written more like Lower Decks than Enterprise in that one little bit. So when they're saying, are we starting to sound like them? It worked within that body of the episode, but in a meta sense, it also made sense. And then I just loved that in addition to those mentions, the whole idea of like the Heronium that they needed to travel back home, the idea that the original Enterprise had built that and that there was this tradition that every piece of the ship has a piece of it. So they just had to find the nice little Easter egg hunt, literally within the ship to find the piece that was the solution. So
very smart. Yeah.
And the fact that like that's Boimler and Mariner knew it. Actually, Mariner knew that one because that's the one part she paid attention to in the museum. So it worked really, really nice. So, but in addition to that, some of the other Easter eggs that really just I mean, first of all, the fact that the entire opening credits was animated.
Yes. What a nice surprise.
Very, very funny, with a nod to the koala, with the idea from Lower Decks that there's a koala controlling the universe. So it's kind of there in the main titles. Plus the same alien that's on the Cerritos in the Lower Decks opening is on the Enterprise in the Strange New Worlds opening. My favorite moment, maybe in the entire episode, is when Boimler gets on Pike's saddle.
Yes.
And is riding Pike's saddle and fully pulls the Riker.
He calls it. He says it.
And he doesn't say the Riker. He just goes Riker and does the leg. And again, I was watching a behind the scenes thing, and that was improv. Quaid just did it. And because Jonathan Frakes was directing the episode, he did it in front of Jonathan Frakes. And Frakes was like, yep, we're keeping that. So that was a really, really great one. You know, Boimler going on and about the tricorders and how he was so into that tricorder. M'Benga's comic timing when he was like, oh yeah, nothing's better than those. I mean, ours don't explode as much. And he was like, what?
Explode?
The time travel thing you mentioned actually is not, I thought it was a Star Trek 4 reference, and I found out it is not. When Mariner comes back and she's like that she was worried that Boimler went back in time and found himself stuck in a dystopian San Francisco in the middle of a riot is
Yeah.
actually a Deep Space Nine reference.
Oh, I thought it was because of
Where
San
Cisco,
Francisco.
Dax,
Okay.
and Bashir went back to the 21st century San
Oh.
Francisco and became part of the Bell riots. So that was
Oh,
it. And also
interesting. Okay.
also the meta moment when Mariner says that to Boimler,
Yeah.
and she's like stuck in San Francisco in the middle of a riot, and Una looks at Pike and goes, do they make very specific references? Which they do. Like, that's what Lower Decks does. So I thought that was really, really cute. The fact
they
that
made a reference to Pike's, like they made a reference to where Pike ends up in the menagerie. Even the beep, they were like, you know about the, like Mariner did the whole design real quick, and it was like, holy shit, don't do that. It was
well, I actually we didn't really touch on the moment. I want to come back to that moment, but then the holy Q line.
Oh yeah.
The holy Q line followed by Mariner saying, "Don't say that. They haven't met him yet." Like that's not like it was just and like they did that. Lower Decks has like 35 Easter eggs per second sometimes in the way that they're talking and the way that they're just dropping references. And so the fact that they kept that was really good. But yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think one of the biggest kind of character Easter eggs that really is essential to where the show is going is the fact that Boimler really wants Pike to celebrate his birthday because he knows he doesn't have that many left.
Yeah.
And kind of like tries to talk around it, and Pike being like, hey, I know what you're talking about, and that's actually not what my issue is. And then goes into all the great stuff about his dad, but just them being so, oh, he knows about, how does he know? Like, did we fuck this up? Like, I don't know. And then, like I said, I think that the whole joke of Una, number one, being like, he keeps looking at me like I'm crazy. I think he hates me. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
And then Mariner being like, oh, he has a pinup of you in his bunk. And she's like a pinup? And she's like, well, it's pinned up. Right. Yes. And her thinking it's one thing. And like I said, just given the second episode, which we both love so much, Una finding out that she is the poster child for Starfleet is a really cool Easter egg, but also just like so sweet.
Yes.
Like it's just incredibly touching. And even Rebecca Romaine kind of being like, well, given the laws of breaking the time-space continuum, you really should not have told me that. But also, thank you for telling me that.
Yeah.
And then the one final Easter egg when you get to the end of the episode, when Commander Ransom comes in and sees Commander Una on the wall and calls her Numera Una, hottest first officer in Starfleet history. It's okay that he says that because he's voiced by Jerry O'Connell, so he's just talking about his wife.
Yeah, exactly. And I love that Boimler doesn't put the hand all the way up. Like it isn't like, yeah, that's right, she is. He's more like, oh, fuck, okay.
But yeah, so I mean, I think that they did right by Strange New Worlds because they really did move a lot of the storylines that we've been watching this season forward. Agreed. And they did really right by Lower Decks because this is exactly how Boimler and Mariner would act on the Enterprise.
Yeah. I want to throw a couple more of these Easter eggs in here, Mike. I know we're already over 35 minutes on this. I was trying to keep us to half an hour with each episode, but
I told you we'd have more to talk about.
Oronium is a new established substance, has not been in Star Trek before, so that's something to hold on to and see where that leads. The camera that Rutherford uses, which is a holographic camera, that was used by the Doctor in Voyager. So that's the thing there. The Starship History Museum is referenced, which is a Picard season 3 thing that we discovered as well. Remember Me is a reference to a Next Generation episode with Dr. Crusher is sucked in the vortex in a similar way and says that. Let's see, the grain to Setlik 2. That is a reference here to more troubles. That's a reference to that. So there's that in terms of a connection there as well. Worf's honor. That's a phrase that apparently is said during Lower. Is that in Lower Decks? Or is
please don't say. Please. That is just exactly the type of thing that's in. It's not. It's the type of thing that's in Lower Decks. Like, okay, don't tell us anything about the future. We don't want to know anything. Worf's honor. Fuck.
It was so great to see that. The NCC-1701. Nothing after it. Like deciding what would come after it. I don't know. That was a nice little inside thing as well. Spock's pet Salat was referenced in this as well, which is a large Vulcan creature that is a teddy bear with fangs. So we see that. being mentioned here as well. The ranks on the sleeves thing, which Mariner points out, I thought that was really funny. Her saying, I don't know if I like that at all. And this idea with the Q stuff is interesting too, because she says they've got a Trelane thing going on, which is a reference to the original series. Trelane was a very Q-like alien from the original series in the Squire of Gothos episode.
Yeah.
And it may be that this is the first confirmation that there is a connection between Q and that episode and that Trelane thing that was going on there. So I think they're saying that it's the first connective tissue that we've seen.
They
People
are,
have speculated that, but
and it's also
really
such a great throwaway line. Like that's
Yes.
so like that's what I'm talking about with Lower Decks. So if like clearly I'm telling you all you should go watch Lower Decks, but the way that they do these throwaway lines where you're like, that's a double Easter egg in one sentence. It's like, ooh, holy cute. Ooh, don't say that. They haven't met him yet. They got more like a Trelane thing going on. Like that is a stacked Easter egg line all by itself and just expertly delivered and perfectly written. So kudos.
Yeah, I agree. 2 or 3 more. Uhura is studying Bajoran and Cardassian languages. Neither of those planets are part of the Federation at this point. So why is she studying them? What is this? What is the reference to that we may be seeing down the road? What?
She's the Hermione Granger of the Enterprise. She's an overachiever.
That's true. Erica Ortegas mentions fighting in the Klingon War again. So are we leading to something with that? Is that another kind of reference that is going to be something that comes up for her? And Pelia giving that advice to Boimler when she says, I always pretended to be someone I wanted to be until finally I became that someone, or he became me. That is a quote from Cary Grant. And that's him talking about how he became this actor that everyone revered and looked at as handsome guy, when in fact, the majority of the time, and he has said this in numerous interviews, he felt like a failure, even though
I'm so glad. I knew the way that she said it, it was a clear reference. She's like, I met this guy a while back or whatever she says. And he said this. I'm like, well, this is obviously a reference to something. So now I'm glad I know. So thank you. See, even I learned stuff on these spoiler reviews.
There you go. Well, I wonder if Pelia has a previous adventure rather, where she met the real Cary Grant in a timeline or in a time travel situation. And if that is something that's going to happen down the road,
she doesn't need to. She doesn't need the time travel. She's thousands of years old.
Well, fair point. I mean, the show time travel. Yes, I hear what you're saying. So very interesting stuff. So yeah, overall, I did enjoy the episode. At times, the humor, as an old fuddy-duddy, it did bother me at times, but overall, the spirit here was really great. And the weaving together of both of the tones of both of those shows, very difficult to do. And I thought the writers here, Catherine Lynn and Bill Wolkoff, knocked it out of the park with Frakes' fantastic direction, of course, as well. Mike?
This is the top episode of the season for me. It's up there. It's up there near the top. I loved it. I'm going to watch it again. Talking about it right now got me stoked. I'm going to watch it again later today.
There you go. And maybe I'll give Lower Decks a shot. Maybe, just maybe.
It'll take you a few episodes. Like, it comes on strong. And like any show, the first couple episodes of the season, it's still finding its footing. But you get about a third to halfway through that first season, and you start to like, okay, I get what they're doing here. I get what this is. And it is just, like I said, it is so full of Star Trek Easter eggs and just funny, weird shit. And like I said, to me, I love Boimler, but Mariner is my MVP of the show. Mariner goes up the list every season of like, are you one of my favorite Star Trek characters? So
yeah, I love that because I love Tawny Newsome. I think she's funny as hell. I've got a secret crush on her as well, and she's always funny whenever she shows up in anything live action or animated. She's always really, really funny, and not someone who's full on blown up yet. But I'm waiting for the day that she does, because she's an incredibly funny comedic talent, and it does some nice dramatic moments when called upon as well. So hopefully there's more for her. Jack's already set up with the boys and what have you, but I want to see more for Tawny down the road for sure. All right, well, there you go. That's our spoiler review of both episodes 6 and 7 of season 2 of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. We will obviously be back later on in the week to review the next episode that's going to come out this week, but we wanted to jump on this one for today and have fun reviewing it. Thanks for joining us. Michael, any final words here as we wrap up? And what do we have to tell them?
Well, for final words are, I mean, I think it's no shock, but we are thoroughly enjoying season 2 of Strange New Worlds, and we hope that you are too. We hope that our reviews are helping you to dive a little deeper into the show and what is working about it. But definitely, if you're not loving it, we want to know that too. So first of all, if you would like to follow us, you can do so on Twitter at geek_buddies, on Instagram at _geek_buddies. You can follow Mr. Rocha at the Rocha Says. You can follow me at MKToon. Definitely smash that like button below. Subscribe to Johnny's Outlaw Nation page. Leave your comments below in the chat. What do you think of Strange New World Season 2? If you are listening to us on a podcast, leave us some stars and some comments so we go up in the rankings. And as always, the best thing that you can do is retweet this video, post it on your socials, send it to your friends, and tell them to hang out with your buddies, the Geek Buddies.
There you go. And thank you all so much. We appreciate it madly. Look forward to reading your comments, and we'll talk to you next time with a brand new spoiler review episode of Strange New World Season 2 here from the
Geek
Buddies. You tell?